Welcome to Sci-Fi Alien, where the unexpected happens in the vastness of space. Imagine a galaxy where humanity, once seen as a chaotic newcomer, unveils its true strength as a strategic force. What happens when an entire galaxy discovers that humans, the seemingly harmless species, are actually apex predators hiding behind diplomacy? Stay tuned to find out. Humanity's arrival on the galactic stage was nothing short of chaotic. For the last 12,000 years, the Galactic Concord had existed as a monument to order and balance, a coalition of sentient species that had mastered the art of diplomacy and power. These species had long ago learned to live with their differences, establishing a peaceful but fiercely guarded equilibrium. In their eyes, the galactic community was a finely tuned machine, with each species playing its part. And then, humanity arrived, uninvited, disorganized, and completely unaware of how to play the game. Ambassador Jackson, humanity's representative, stood at the heart of this diplomatic disaster. In his mind, he was simply doing what he did best: negotiate, laugh off the tensions, and keep things moving forward. But to the Concord, humanity's approach was not just disorganized, it was loud, insistent, and fundamentally awkward. To the thousand-year-old species in the Concord, humans were like a toddler stumbling into a room full of polished diplomats, tripping over their own feet and making noise in a place where subtlety and protocol ruled. But what they failed to see was the method in the madness. Jackson's first official act as ambassador was to attend the Harmony Gala, a grand event meant to commemorate the unity of the Concord's diverse species. The seating arrangements, though seemingly trivial, were crucial. Each species had its assigned place, rooted in centuries of tradition. But when Jackson arrived, he noticed something that bothered him. The seats were off. His people were seated in what could only be described as the noisy neighbor's nook, an area reserved for new members or those whose status was still in flux. For humans, this was an insult, but Jackson knew better than to cause a scene, at least, not yet. "Ambassador Jackson," said High Counselor Ziril, a crystalline being with facets that shimmered under the dim lighting, "you are aware, of course, that your delegation has been placed in the emerging interests section, yes?" Jackson's lips curled into a smile that didn't quite reach his eyes. "Yes, of course." He glanced around the room, where representatives from various species exchanged pleasantries in their own native languages. Some, like the Aryans, communicated through color, shifting skin patterns, while others, such as the Zelkorians, emitted melodic tones. All of them were paying attention to him now, their eyes filled with a mixture of curiosity and disdain. "It is the designated space for new members, Ambassador," Ziril continued, clearly trying to keep his tone neutral. But even his refracted light patterns betrayed irritation. "It's a matter of tradition, you see." Jackson gave a small nod, still pretending to understand. Humans, after all, were still very much the outsiders in this vast galactic dance. Despite their technological advancements and their rapid development, the Galactic Concord viewed them with an air of condescension. They were the newcomers, granted, they had gained a seat at the table, but only just. "Well," Jackson said, finally dropping the polite mask, "we'll just have to make do. But, I have to say, I don't think we're the ones who need to be placed in the back of the room." "What do you think, Counselor Ziril?" Ziril blinked, the iridescent facets of his face flickering in confusion. "What do you mean?" he asked. "You know," Jackson said, his smile widening slightly, "if we're talking about hierarchy, maybe we should reconsider how this all works. Who's really in the back when we're just getting started?" I think it's time the Concorde rethought the seating arrangements. You may want to place us in the front, because we've got some surprises coming your way." Zero looked around, clearly bewildered by the boldness of Jackson's words, while some of the other delegates exchanged uncertain glances. The comment, in many ways, was a diplomatic faux pas. And yet, it had effectively made its mark. It was the human way, assertive, unpolished, and loud, but never lacking in confidence. As the gala continued, Jackson's comments seemed to take on an air of deliberate mischief. He had effectively undermined the usual order, even if the other species were too polite to admit it. But what they didn't realize was that Jackson's actions were a carefully crafted distraction, one that would ultimately serve as cover for the real mission humanity had in the Concorde. Behind the facade of small talk, awkward seating arrangements, and innocuous laughter, humans were working on something far more significant. While Jackson played the role of the diplomatic fool, humanity was gathering intelligence, infiltrating criminal syndicates that the Concorde had failed to address for centuries. The seating arrangements at the gala weren't just a petty issue for Jackson, they were a calculated act. He knew that the other species wouldn't see him coming, and that his perceived foolishness would be the perfect cover for humanity's true mission. Back in the human delegation office, Jackson and his team gathered around the holographic displays. "I've got news," Jackson said, leaning forward with a newfound intensity in his voice. "The shipment cleared customs on 3 different worlds, and it's only a matter of time before they realize we're onto them." A young operative, Jonas, looked at him, wide-eyed. "You mean, all this gala nonsense was just to cover our tracks?" Jackson smiled, his eyes gleaming with the quiet satisfaction of someone who knew exactly what they were doing. "It's all part of the game, Jonas. They never saw it coming." In a way, Jackson's diplomatic faux pas, his awkward jokes, and the strange human tendency to disrupt the status quo had all been carefully orchestrated to create the perfect distraction. As the Concorde's most powerful species debated issues of seating and trivialities, humanity had already secured its position as the real power in the galaxy, quietly manipulating events from the shadows. And what the Concorde failed to realize was that humanity had no intention of simply playing along. They weren't just diplomats, they were survivors, and that made them a force more dangerous than anyone in the galaxy could imagine. The galaxy was about to learn the truth. Humanity wasn't just pretending to be diplomats, they were apex predators playing the long game. After the chaos at the Harmony Gala, where humans had been nothing more than a loud and disruptive presence, the true extent of their plans began to unfold in ways that no one could have predicted. Humanity's awkward entry into the galactic political scene had been the perfect cover for what was really happening behind the scenes. While the Concorde's highest-ranking species bickered over seating arrangements, humanity had been making calculations, and they were several steps ahead. Ambassador Jackson's antics at the gala were the distraction that allowed humanity to carry out its real mission without anyone suspecting a thing. What seemed like a petty issue over where humans would sit at a diplomatic event was, in fact, a carefully orchestrated move to keep the other species focused on trivialities. Jackson had intentionally made himself the comic relief in the diplomatic room, allowing him to operate unnoticed in a galaxy where perception mattered more than reality. As the human delegation continued to disrupt Concorde events with their strange customs and behaviors, their true purpose was being executed far from the diplomatic floors of the Galactic Concorde's headquarters. Jackson, known for his loud, unpredictable nature, was secretly leading a covert operation that the Concorde never saw coming. It was a well-executed, multi-layered plan that had been set in motion long before any of the galactic representatives realized what was happening. A small, quiet meeting took place in a remote section of the human delegation office, away from the prying eyes of the Concorde. Inside, Jackson and his inner circle were gathered, the air thick with anticipation. "How are we looking, Jonas?" Jackson's voice cut through the room, his usual calm demeanor replaced with a rare, focused edge. Jonas, the newest operative, nervously tapped away at a holographic display, scanning through data. "The shipments cleared customs, sir. 3 different worlds, 3 separate operations. We're in the clear. But no one suspects what we're really doing." His voice was tinged with disbelief, as though still processing the fact that they were actively manipulating the situation, and the Concorde hadn't noticed a thing. Jackson smirked, leaning back in his chair as he considered the results. Perfect timing. While they're all worried about how we eat, sit, or speak, we're taking down the most powerful crime syndicate the galaxy has ever known. We're not just diplomats, Jonas. We're the ones who decide when the game is over. His eyes glinted with a mixture of pride and resolve. The quiet operation had been going on for months, and Jackson's ability to manipulate the political noise around them allowed humanity to gather vital intelligence. The plan was clear: expose the corruption that had flourished under the Concorde's nose and neutralize the threat. It was the perfect use of human ingenuity. They played the fool while quietly eliminating the most significant threat to the stability of the galaxy. "Ambassador," another aide interrupted, her voice trembling slightly. "We've identified 12 major distribution nodes, but we need to move quickly. If they catch wind of our activities, we won't have time to strike." Jackson stood up, pushing his chair back with deliberate slowness. "No one will catch wind. Not while they're all too busy arguing about where we should sit. We have to keep them distracted just a little longer. The moment they realize how deeply we've embedded ourselves into their system, it'll be too late." The human delegation's approach to diplomacy had always been viewed with suspicion and confusion. In human culture, distraction was an art form, a method of keeping the attention of the enemy focused on trivial issues, while the real battle was fought elsewhere. The seating arrangements at the gala had seemed like a petty diplomatic issue, but it was actually the perfect cover for their operations. Every move, every awkward joke, every seemingly insignificant comment had kept the Concorde's representatives engaged in irrelevant drama, leaving them blind to the bigger picture. As Jackson reviewed the final details, he couldn't help but reflect on the momentary amusement he had felt earlier, when he made light of the aliens' complaints about human pheromones. The Concorde's reactions to human behavior were almost laughable, especially when compared to the quiet strength humanity wielded when it mattered. Their reputation for disruption was the perfect disguise for what lay beneath. Later that day, as the council continued their discussions, Jackson returned to the issue of the criminal syndicate with the precision of a seasoned tactician. "We've got them. The rest is just paperwork." He was addressing the gathered council members, whose perceptions of humanity had been clouded by cultural misunderstandings and diplomatic blunders. "What do you mean by that?" asked the High Counselor Ziril, whose crystalline form shimmered with skepticism. Jackson grinned, his expression almost predatory. "We've been tracking the syndicate for months. We know their key leaders, we know their operations, and now we know exactly where to hit them." He glanced around the room, feeling the unease ripple through the air as the other species processed the weight of his words. The Kian delegate, who had long viewed humanity with disdain, now seemed to be listening more intently. "You're claiming to have infiltrated a galactic criminal operation while we've been negotiating seed placements." Ziril's voice was tinged with disbelief. Jackson nodded without hesitation. "Exactly. While you've been discussing trivialities, we've been eradicating threats that have plagued the Concord for decades. But of course, that's not something you'd expect from us, is it? You expected us to be loud, ineffective, and out of our depth, didn't you? The room fell into an uneasy silence, but Jackson's next words were deliberate. Humans understand that when the galaxy fails to act, we must. We don't sit around waiting for solutions. We make them. The alien representative, who had once objected to humanity's seating arrangements, sat quietly now, his expression reflecting uncertainty and respect. The others shifted uneasily in their seats. The quiet realization that humanity had never been the weak, loud species they had assumed was beginning to set in. Jackson's smile remained, but it was now tempered by a sense of deep satisfaction. He knew exactly what he had done. Humanity had played the long game. The disruption had been the perfect distraction, one that allowed humanity to step into the shadows and eliminate a threat that no one else could. So, what's next? Asked one of the aides, her voice filled with a mix of awe and anticipation. How do we keep them from realizing what we've done? Jackson looked at the team gathered around him, the weight of their collective effort pressing down on him with quiet intensity. We keep distracting them. While they focus on what we're doing, we keep building. The time for pretending to be diplomats is over. We've shown them what happens when we stop pretending. Now, we prepare for the future. It's time for humanity to take its place, not as diplomats, but as the apex predators we've always been. As the final pieces of the puzzle came together, the true nature of humanity's power was revealed, not through grand speeches or boasts, but through cold, calculated actions. The Concorde had seen humanity as nothing more than an awkward newcomer, an overly enthusiastic species with good intentions but little understanding of how to navigate the complex politics of the galaxy. They were wrong. And the ultimate revelation was about to show them just how wrong they were. It all came to a head during the Security Council meeting, a session convened with the aim of discussing the escalating threat posed by the intergalactic criminal syndicate humanity had uncovered. Jackson, always the calm diplomat, had long since dropped the pretense of politeness. Now, with the evidence laid out before the council, there was no need for subtlety or manipulation. This was no longer about making an impression, it was about taking control. As the various representatives murmured amongst themselves, unsure of what to make of the evidence presented by Ambassador Jackson, he stood tall, unflinching. His voice was calm, yet there was an edge to it that reflected the magnitude of what was unfolding. What you see before you is not just a collection of documents or intercepted communications. Jackson began, his eyes scanning the room, the weight of the moment settling on each individual present. This is proof of a galactic crime syndicate that has operated under the Concorde's very nose for centuries. And we're the ones who found it? Not you. Not your so-called security experts. The room was silent, the weight of Jackson's words hanging heavily in the air. The Kian representative, whose species had long been the military powerhouse of the galaxy, shifted uncomfortably in their seat. It was clear that the Concorde had underestimated humanity, and this simple truth was slowly sinking in. Jackson's words were not a boast, they were a simple statement of fact. We've been observing, Jackson continued, a slight smirk playing on his lips, and it's become clear that while you were busy debating minor seating arrangements, we've been cleaning up your mess. This criminal syndicate has been infiltrating and manipulating the very fabric of the Concorde. The data we've compiled shows not just their operations, but the deep corruption that's rotted the core of your supposed order. As the alien representative squirmed, unable to meet Jackson's gaze, Jackson turned his attention to the Zelkorian delegate, whose antennae twitched nervously. "You're not angry about our methods," Jackson continued. "You're angry because we've done in months what your systems couldn't achieve in decades." The truth cut deep, and Jackson knew it. The Concorde had relied on outdated protocols, its security directorate ineffective and bloated. Meanwhile, humanity, with all its awkwardness, its loudness, and its unconventional tactics, had been quietly dismantling an empire of criminal organizations. For the first time, humans were not just participants in the Galactic Concorde, they were the ones who were reshaping it. There was a moment of profound silence in the room, as the leaders of the galaxy began to process the implications. Jackson wasn't finished. The convergence of humanity's intelligence operations and military capabilities was something the galaxy had simply never considered. The other species had assumed that humans, with their diplomatic naivete, were harmless, chaotic forces that could be ignored. They had been mistaken. "I've been to your meetings." Jackson's voice grew quieter, but there was a bite to it now. "I've heard your complaints, your concerns, your frustrations. But all of that is meaningless if you can't even protect yourselves from the very forces operating under your noses. You want peace, but you refuse to take action when it matters most. We're not like you. When we see a threat, we don't debate it. We act." The silence in the room was palpable. For the first time, Jackson allowed the weight of his words to fully sink in, and the room became uncomfortable. The other representatives shifted uncomfortably, uncertain of how to respond. The Arcturian mediator, usually quick with a solution, looked lost for words. Jackson had thrown the Concorde's incompetence into stark relief, and no one had an answer for him. And that's when the final piece fell into place. Jackson had never been just a diplomat. He had always been a strategist, an architect of long-term survival. What the Concorde failed to understand was that humans had always been playing a different game, a game of survival, of adaptation, and of inevitable victory. As Jackson's aides prepared for the next phase of the operation, he addressed the assembly one last time. "What you fail to understand," he said, his voice sharp, "is that humanity has never been just a passive observer in this galaxy. We've been watching, learning, waiting for the right moment to reveal ourselves. And now, that moment has come. We are not here to join your system, we are here to reshape it." A quiet murmur swept through the room, and for the first time, humanity's presence in the galaxy was no longer met with derision or mockery. The Concorde had misjudged humanity's intentions, and the unexpected reveal of humanity's true capabilities was both a shock and a wake-up call for every species in the room. Jackson's grin was subtle, but satisfaction was evident in his eyes. He had known all along that this moment would come, that the Concorde's complacency would catch up with them. Humanity had made its grand reveal, not through brute force, but through strategy, intelligence, and ruthless precision. And in that moment, the galaxy was forced to acknowledge the truth about humanity: we were no longer the weak, loud species that arrived on the scene. We were apex predators, capable of navigating galactic politics with a smile and a handshake, but ready to unleash our true strength when the time came. The ultimate reveal had begun, and the galaxy would never see humanity the same way again. The moment of humanity's revelation had passed, but the shock of it lingered in the air like a storm cloud hanging over the Galactic Concorde. After Jackson's calculated unmasking, the Concorde's representatives now saw humanity as more than just a disruptive force in the galaxy. The question that haunted them was simple: what kind of species had they allowed into their ranks? No longer could they dismiss humanity as a brash newcomer, with its loud laughter, awkward diplomatic practices, and its uncanny ability to disrupt. Now, the galaxy was learning that humanity's true nature was not to be underestimated. They had been concealing their true power all along. Ambassador Jackson, the seemingly bumbling diplomat, had masterfully played the role of the fool while humanity silently, and swiftly, took control. Humanity wasn't just good at diplomacy, they were apex predators, honed by a history of survival in an unforgiving world. For years, they had been watching, learning, and studying the other species in the galactic concord, not with the eyes of a peaceful observer, but with the keen, calculating eyes of hunters. They had masked their predatory instincts behind a veneer of diplomacy, pretending to be just another species trying to fit in. But the truth had become undeniable. Humanity wasn't just participating in the game, they were silently preparing to dominate it. It was in the moments after the criminal syndicate's takedown that Jackson allowed the full weight of the human strategy to come into focus. He had laid bare a strategy that no one had seen coming, because they had been so caught up in their assumptions about humans. While the Concord was engaged in its petty squabbles, humanity was outmaneuvering them at every turn. Jackson was no longer just a diplomat, he was the representative of a species that knew how to survive, and when necessary, how to eliminate any threat to their existence. "I don't think they quite understand us yet," Jackson remarked to his aide, as the tension in the council room still buzzed with uncertainty. His voice was calm, almost detached, as he reviewed the results of the intelligence operation. "They see us as the disruptive child in the room. What they haven't realized is that we've been the ones holding all the cards from the start." The aide, still shocked by the outcome, could only nod. "They didn't see us coming, sir. The others never realized how much they underestimated us." Jackson turned to face the aide, his expression unreadable. "They never thought to look beyond our awkwardness. They never considered that we were carefully studying them, just waiting for the right moment. In the galaxy, humanity was thought to be a young species, immature and ill-prepared for the intricacies of galactic politics. They had been given a seat at the table, at first, only to appease the newer, younger members of the Concord. But in their humility, humanity had done something the others hadn't, they had observed and learned. They had not come to dominate, but they had come to survive. And in doing so, they had mastered the art of patience, quietly waiting for the opportunity to reveal their true strength. "Jackson, do you ever wonder if they'll catch up to us?" asked another operative, a quiet voice in the corner of the room. She was nervous, knowing how much was riding on their next steps. "No, I don't," Jackson replied firmly. "Because while they've been too busy holding on to their power, we've been evolving. We've adapted to every obstacle we've faced, and we're always one step ahead. We never lost track of who we are, what we were, or what we're capable of. And that's the real mistake they've made." He paused for a moment, reflecting on the long road humanity had traveled. "The fact that they see us as the joke is exactly what's kept us alive. They couldn't imagine that the ones who seemed the least likely to succeed would end up being the ones who shaped the future of this galaxy." What the Concord had failed to see was that humanity wasn't driven by a desire for power or dominance. They were driven by something deeper: survival. Humanity had been pushed to the edge, time and time again, but they had always found a way to adapt, fight back, and thrive. It was this predatory instinct, refined over millennia of struggle and evolution, that had been humanity's greatest strength. They weren't hungry for conquest, they were hungry to protect what was theirs, to ensure that they never faced extinction. But now that they had shown their claws, the galaxy was starting to understand. The Kian Empire, the Aryans, and the others could no longer ignore the fact that humanity's diplomatic face was nothing more than a mask, a mask that had concealed their true, dangerous potential. And when it was time, humanity would unleash it. "We aren't like you," Jackson had said in the meeting. "You wait for things to happen, and then you react. We don't wait. We control the situation before it even begins." This distinction was the core of humanity's survival strategy. The other species of the Concorde had built bigger ships, stronger weapons, and more elaborate defenses, but they had neglected the one thing that humans understood above all else: control. Humanity didn't wait for threats to appear, they created the environment in which threats were neutralized before they could even begin. The shock of humanity's real strength settled over the room like a heavy fog. The diplomatic faux pas, the awkward gestures, and the over-the-top gestures had all been part of a grand plan. Jackson's behavior, once perceived as foolish and misinformed, now seemed to be the perfect disguise. Humans had been playing a different game, one of strategy, patience, and precision. They had been waiting for the right moment, and when the time came, they acted decisively, with the cold precision of an apex predator who knew exactly what was at stake. "We aren't just diplomats." Jackson's words echoed in the minds of every Concorde representative present. The realization hit hard: humans were far more dangerous than anyone had imagined. And yet, despite their incredible capabilities, they had chosen a path of cooperation and survival, rather than outright conquest. This was what made humanity so unique. They were predators, yes, but they were predators who had chosen to play by the rules, as long as the rules served their survival. And when the rules didn't, they broke them. As the reality of humanity's true nature began to sink in, it became clear that the galaxy had underestimated them. For the longest time, humanity had been written off as chaotic, inexperienced newcomers, loud and brash, with their awkward diplomacy and tendency to irritate the older, more established species. But the moment had arrived, and with it came a revelation that no one had seen coming. Humanity's true brilliance was not in their ability to make noise, but in their strategic genius, a genius that had been lying in wait, unseen and unrecognized by the galaxy. The Concorde's council was in chaos, their minds still trying to piece together the shocking details of what they had just learned. They had spent centuries perfecting their systems of diplomacy, intelligence, and military power. But humans had proven that raw power wasn't always the deciding factor. The way Ambassador Jackson had outmaneuvered them all was like a master chess player revealing his brilliant moves after the game had been won. "How did we miss this?" The words came from the Kian representative, his voice tight with disbelief. His species had once ruled the galaxy with unparalleled might, and now, they were confronted by a species they had dismissed as naive. Jackson's calm demeanor, his seemingly unassuming presence, had concealed a mind that was capable of precision and foresight beyond what the Concorde had ever expected. Jackson leaned back in his seat, his fingers steepled together, a small but confident smile on his face. "How indeed, Zyril," he replied, his voice calm but filled with an underlying sharpness. "Maybe it's because you were too busy thinking you had it all figured out. While you were fixating on our awkwardness, we were working on our own playbook." The room was quiet, the air thick with tension. It was only then that the full weight of the situation settled in. The Concorde had made a fatal mistake by assuming that humanity's flaws were weaknesses. But those flaws were actually disguises that allowed humans to move beneath the radar, unnoticed by the most powerful forces in the galaxy. "You have to give them credit," whispered Delegate Creel of the Orions, his voice soft but filled with reluctant admiration. "They knew exactly how to use their perceived weaknesses as a weapon." Jackson's smile deepened. "You're not wrong. That's exactly how we played it. He stood up slowly, his tall frame commanding attention. "We've been out there, quietly observing everything. Studying each one of you, your tactics, your strategies. You've been too comfortable. Too secure in your positions. And now, you're waking up to the reality that humanity is not just a player in this galaxy, we are a force to be reckoned with." The shock was palpable. The Aryans, known for their imposing technological advancements, exchanged uneasy glances. The Zelkorians, who prided themselves on their long history of military dominance, were visibly shaken. For the first time, they realized that humanity's outward bumbling had been a brilliant distraction for a much larger, more sophisticated plan. "What are you saying, Ambassador?" asked Ziril, his voice low with both anger and awe. "That you've been pulling the strings behind the scenes all along? That we've been blind to your true capabilities?" "That's exactly what I'm saying," Jackson replied, his tone steady. "The world doesn't have to know everything to know how to win. While you've been debating the finer points of galactic diplomacy, we've been executing counterintelligence, infiltrating your networks, and even securing critical resources that would give us leverage when the time came. You've been acting like the underdog," said High Marshal Gillick, his voice dripping with disbelief, "while you've been building your own empire in the shadows. How long have you been planning this?" "Oh, a while." Jackson's gaze shifted, his smile taking on a hint of something darker. "But don't worry. It wasn't all about power for us. We came into this with a goal, to protect the future of humanity. The galaxy doesn't need another military power, but it does need someone willing to take action when it counts. And when it comes to that, I'm afraid none of you have shown us that you're up to the task." The silence in the room was deafening. The Concord, which had prided itself on its ability to remain a neutral force in the galaxy, was beginning to see the cracks in its foundation. Humans had played the long game, not just for political dominance, but for survival. They had been preparing for the worst case scenario, watching, learning, and waiting for the moment when the galaxy would be forced to acknowledge their strength. "You've waited for us to make the first move," muttered Delegate Tavik of the Beakerians, still visibly stunned. "You've waited until we were too complacent. And now you're forcing our hand." Jackson leaned forward slightly, his voice taking on a cold edge. "And that's the mistake you made, Tavik. You assumed we were like you, waiting for things to happen. Humans don't wait. We make things happen. And when we make a move, we make sure it counts." The room grew quiet again, each representative of the Concord now grappling with the full realization that humanity wasn't just a species to be tolerated or underestimated. They were a species that had learned to adapt, to fight, and to survive, and they had done it without ever revealing the full extent of their capabilities. Jackson had orchestrated this revelation carefully. He wasn't angry, he wasn't frustrated. He was simply releasing the tension that had been building up for years. Humanity had been playing the part of the naive outsider while working in the shadows. But now, their true strength was visible for all to see, and the galaxy would never look at them the same way again. "This is only the beginning," Jackson added, his voice filled with quiet confidence. "We've shown you what we can do. And now you'll have to decide whether you want us as allies or adversaries. But don't be mistaken, humans don't care which path you choose. We'll keep pushing forward, no matter the cost." The Concorde was left in stunned silence, and for the first time in centuries, the galaxy was no longer certain of its dominance. Humanity had revealed itself as a force to be reckoned with, and this time, the Concorde would have to adapt to humans' rules. And no one, not even the most powerful species, could predict what that would mean for the future of the galaxy. The shock waves from the council meeting still reverberated throughout the galactic concord. In the wake of humanity's revelation, the galaxy had been forced to reconsider everything it thought it knew about this loud, chaotic species. The reality was undeniable: humanity was no longer the awkward newcomer in galactic politics. They had demonstrated, beyond any doubt, that they were not to be underestimated. The Predator's teeth had been bared, and the Concord was left to wonder just how much more humanity was capable of. Yet, the most surprising element of all was not the sheer force or military power humanity could wield. It was their decision to choose peace, despite the unseen power they could unleash at a moment's notice. In the quiet aftermath of the Security Council meeting, Ambassador Jackson and his closest aides gathered in the human delegation's chambers. The air was thick with unspoken tension. Despite the victory they had just secured, Jackson's demeanor remained calm, almost unsettlingly so. His hands, which had once rested in an easy, confident posture, now steepled thoughtfully as he stared out at the galactic skyline. "Well, Jackson," one of his aides, Riley, said, her voice a mix of awe and cautious excitement, "you've just exposed a criminal syndicate that's been operating under the Concord's nose for centuries. The galaxy's entire perception of us has shifted. Now, we have to decide, do we push this advantage? Do we use our power to seize a larger role?" Jackson's lips curled into a slight smile, but his eyes remained distant, focused on something only he could see in the endless expanse of space. "You don't get it, do you, Riley?" He turned slowly, meeting her eyes with a gaze that was steady and unwavering. "The fact that we can act decisively when necessary is what sets us apart. But our strength isn't just in our ability to fight. It's in our decision to hold back. Our greatest weapon, Riley, is that we can choose peace." Riley blinked, clearly confused by his response. "Choose peace? After everything we've just uncovered? After showing them what we can do?" Jackson nodded, his voice softening. "Yes, peace. We don't have to conquer, Riley. That's the difference. We're predators, yes, but we don't hunt unless we have to. We've spent so much time learning, adapting, surviving, that now, when the opportunity arises, we have a choice. And humanity chooses peace." He turned his gaze back to the stars, his voice growing quieter. "We didn't come here to be the next conquerors of the galaxy. We came here to protect our own, to build something more than just power. We're not like them. We're different." The room was silent for a long moment, as if the weight of Jackson's words was sinking in. The galactic power dynamics were shifting in humanity's favor, but what Jackson was proposing felt almost counterintuitive. In a galaxy where strength was the most respected currency, to choose peace was a bold and unexpected move. The other species of the Concord had ruled through force and manipulation for millennia. And here were the humans, choosing a path that many would see as weak, yet for Jackson, it was the most strategic decision they could make. The Kian Empire, once the undisputed military power of the galaxy, now watched humanity's moves with mixed awe and suspicion. They had seen the prowess with which humanity had defeated their schemes, dismantling a massive criminal empire in the shadows. Yet, instead of capitalizing on their newfound strength, humanity had decided to remain in the background, choosing peace over immediate conquest. "So, this is what you've been thinking all along?" another aide, Simone, asked cautiously, stepping forward from the back of the room. "We just demonstrated that we can dominate the galaxy, and yet we choose to back off." Jackson turned to her, his expression serious. "We've demonstrated that we can dominate when needed. But domination isn't the goal, Simone. Our goal is survival, and that requires wisdom. The others in the room, his trusted lieutenants, exchanged glances. Humanity's rise had been marked by tactical brilliance and cunning, but now Jackson was asking them to make an important choice, to be the defenders of peace or to use their newly acquired strength to dominate. It's not just about power, Jackson continued, sensing their unease. The Concorde is built on a delicate balance, one we've learned to navigate. If we suddenly shift the balance, we risk destabilizing everything. No, humanity doesn't need to conquer. What we need is to shape this galaxy in a way that benefits all of us, without throwing it into chaos. As Jackson spoke, a thought nagged at him, the fear that perhaps the galaxy would never truly understand the complexity of humanity's choice. Would they forever see them as a species who were capable of brutal destruction yet chose to hold back for the sake of something greater? We are predators, Jackson muttered, as if the realization had only just fully sunk in. But we don't hunt for sport. We hunt to survive. And humanity's greatest strength is that we can choose when to use that strength. In the aftermath of the Galactic operation and their success, Jackson knew that peace would not be easy. It would be difficult to maintain that delicate balance in a galaxy now wary of humanity's true power. But what he saw in their quiet resilience, in their decision to stay calm, to not lash out at their newfound position of strength, was the hallmark of something far more significant. They had not just defeated the old powers. They had shown the galaxy that there was another way to lead. The Concorde would come to see this decision as one of both wisdom and strength. Humanity had the potential to rule, yes. But they also had the ability to choose a path of cooperation, something the galaxy's other species had failed to understand. They had been so focused on survival through power that they missed the true nature of humankind's brilliance, the brilliance of knowing when to fight and when to stand down, of knowing when to preserve and when to strike. Do you think they'll ever understand? Asked Simone, her voice tinged with uncertainty. Jackson's gaze softened as he looked out the window at the stars. Maybe one day. Or maybe they'll just keep assuming we're the same as they are, predators who only want to destroy. But that's not the human way. We know how to protect. We know how to save the galaxy. His voice was quiet now, filled with a quiet certainty that resonated deeply with those around him. And maybe, just maybe, the rest of the galaxy will learn from us, that there's more power in peace than in anything else. In the silence that followed, the galaxy outside the window stretched out, vast, infinite, and full of possibility. And for the first time in humanity's journey across the stars, they were ready to claim a new role, not as conquerors, but as peacekeepers. Not as predators, but as survivors who had found a way to shape the future through the very thing that had once seemed impossible, their ability to choose peace. The shift in galactic power was not something that could be seen in a single day. It didn't come with a sudden flare of violence or an unexpected military conquest. Instead, it came quietly, as a change in perception. The galaxy's powers, once certain that humanity was just another species to tolerate, were now confronted by the fact that humans were far more than they seemed. The Concorde's complacency had allowed humanity to move unnoticed, building up strength, strategy, and influence. But it was no longer something they could ignore. The time had come for humanity to take its true place among the stars. The shift in power began with a subtle undercurrent of respect. When Ambassador Jackson had first entered the galactic scene, he was dismissed as little more than a loud diplomat with an odd sense of humor. Humanity, to the older species of the Concorde, was an inexperienced, unpredictable force. But after the unveiling of their intelligence operations, the deconstruction of the criminal syndicate, and the strategic brilliance shown in the process, the galaxy began to see a different side of humanity. The apex predator was no longer hiding behind diplomatic pleasantries. Now, it was clear to the galaxy, humanity had been playing the long game. "Do you realize what's happening?" the Kian representative asked, his voice tense, his typical confidence faltering. He looked around at his colleagues, who seemed just as unsettled. "We've always been the ones who moved the pieces. The ones who dictated the future of the galaxy." But now, he trailed off, unable to finish his thought. "You're starting to see it, aren't you?" Jackson said, his voice calm, yet filled with an underlying certainty. His usual smile was gone, replaced by something far more dangerous, an awareness. "We've been on the periphery, looking in, learning the game. But now, we're ready to step forward. And when we do, you'll all have to adjust to how we play." The shift was evident to those who understood the underlying currents of galactic power. The Zelkorians, who had long held sway as diplomatic masterminds, exchanged uneasy glances. The Aryans, once the feared military giants of the galaxy, were questioning their place in a future where humanity had proven it could not only survive but thrive in the cutthroat political arena. The Concord's long, standing sense of superiority began to fray, unraveling slowly with every word Jackson spoke. "What are you proposing, Ambassador?" asked High Counselor Ziril, his voice softer now, almost hesitant. "That humanity should simply take over? That we all bow to your superior strength?" Jackson's eyes flicked toward him, and for the first time, a shadow of something darker crossed his face. "No. I'm not proposing anything like that." He leaned forward slightly, his voice steady but intense. "What I'm saying is that humanity has earned its place. We have the strength, the intelligence, and the ability to lead, not through force, but through cooperation. We're offering a chance to create something new. Something that works for all of us. The Concord's ways have failed. The old powers have fallen behind, and the galaxy needs a new path forward." His words settled over the room like a heavy weight. For the first time, the Concord wasn't looking at humanity as a disruptive force but as a potential ally, and even more, the key to the future. The Aryans, who had long been the most skeptical of humanity, began to speak up. "We can't deny the reality of what has just happened," said Marshal Gillick, his voice laced with reluctant respect. "We've been caught off guard, yes. But perhaps this is the moment we need to rethink the future. Humanity has a way of turning the tables, whether we want it or not." "Exactly," Jackson said, almost as if he'd anticipated this. "We didn't choose to be your competitors. But we've been forced to be. You all thought we were just stumbling around. But we've been watching, adapting, learning the rules of your game, and now, we've redefined them. We're not here to destroy what you've built. But we will change how things are done. Humanity knows the importance of cooperation, but we also understand that sometimes, a new approach is necessary." The shift in perception was subtle, but it was there. The Kian Empire, with its vast military might, was no longer the undisputed leader of the galaxy. The Zelkorians, once the arbiters of diplomacy, could no longer claim to be the only voice of reason. Humanity, through patience, intelligence, and strategic brilliance, had moved from the periphery to the very heart of the galactic conversation. Yet, even as they stood on the cusp of this new role, Jackson knew that it would not be without its challenges. The Concord was a deeply entrenched institution, and old powers were not easily displaced. Humanity had come far, but the galaxy was vast, and the path ahead would require more than just intelligence and strength. It would require wisdom, the wisdom to lead without dominating, to offer a vision of the future that was inclusive, not imperial. Humanity is not here to take over, Jackson said, his voice now calm, almost reflective. We're here to lead by example. We'll show you a new way. A way where we coexist, and where the old systems of control and manipulation give way to something better. We've proven that we can defend ourselves, that we can be strategic, but we can also offer peace and opportunity. The choice is now yours. How will you react to this new reality? Will you resist, or will you join us in creating something better? The question hung in the air, and for the first time, Jackson saw the glimmers of respect in the eyes of the Concord representatives. The galaxy had just learned a valuable lesson: humans were not a species of chaos. They were a species that could thrive under any circumstance, using their intelligence, adaptability, and strategy to become the dominant force in the galaxy, not through brute force, but through cooperation and strategic brilliance. The galaxy was changing, and the Concord was beginning to see humanity for what they truly were. After the initial shock and the stunning revelation of humanity's true capabilities, the conversation had shifted. What once appeared to be an awkward, chaotic species stumbling through galactic politics had now proven themselves as not only capable of surviving but of thriving in a way that none of the more established species could ignore. Ambassador Jackson had presented humanity's strengths, not through overwhelming force, but through intelligence, strategy, and the careful construction of alliances. And now, the final revelation was about to unfold. For the last several months, the Kian Empire, Aryans, Zelkorians, and every other species in the Galactic Concord had been working through their initial shock, recalibrating their understanding of humanity. What they hadn't yet fully understood, however, was that humanity was playing a long game, one that could be incredibly advantageous for the Concord itself, if they were willing to accept humanity's offer. The apex predator had not come to conquer. They had come to offer a partnership, an alliance based on mutual respect, strategic benefit, and a shared vision for the future. It was during a meeting convened by the Concord's High Council that Jackson finally laid bare the full extent of humanity's plans. The diplomatic facade was gone, replaced by the calm, calculated mind of a strategist who understood exactly how to play the game. "I've made my position clear," Jackson began, his voice steady as he addressed the assembly of galactic leaders. "Humanity isn't here to conquer. We're not interested in empire building. What we want is cooperation. We want to be partners in something greater than any single species. The Concord needs humanity as much as we need you. If we are to survive the coming challenges, it will be together." The response was immediate. Murmurs rippled through the room, from the Aryans, who had long relied on their strength, to the Zelkorians, who considered themselves the guardians of peace. Jackson's words had struck a chord, though they couldn't admit it yet. The apex predator was speaking the language they all understood: survival. Jackson's gaze swept over the representatives, his voice remaining calm but gaining an edge of insightful authority. "You all know the challenges the galaxy faces, threats we've all been too afraid to name. The galaxy is changing, and not in ways we're prepared for. We're no longer isolated in our individual domains. To face what's coming, we need allies, and we need them now. Humanity is offering that alliance, not based on conquest, but on the understanding that only together can we hope to survive." The room was silent. The Kian delegate, once proud and imposing, exchanged glances with the Mythos aliens, whose species had lived for millennia in relative peace. Even the Valter Dominion, the feared warriors, were uncertain. This was a different kind of challenge, one they had never faced before. But Jackson wasn't finished. He knew how to push their buttons, how to leverage humanity's perceived weakness to his advantage. You've all had your chance to build your empires, he continued, a subtle edge creeping into his voice. But you've failed. We've watched as your systems, your security, and your diplomatic efforts crumbled under the weight of corruption and complacency. Humanity has learned how to act when no one else will. We've been the quiet observers while you all focused on your petty squabbles. And now we're telling you, we have the solutions. We can offer you the strategic alliance that will change the future of this galaxy. But that means accepting humanity as equals, not as your subordinates. The words hung in the air, thick with tension. Jackson's words were no longer just diplomatic niceties, they were a declaration, and the galaxy was starting to realize the weight they carried. And what exactly do you propose, Ambassador? High Marshal Gillick of the Valter Dominion asked, his voice sharp. He had long been the voice of military strength in the council, but now he was uncertain, the respectful distance he had once maintained growing smaller with each passing second. I propose that we combine our strengths, Jackson replied, not missing a beat. Humanity has the infrastructure, the military prowess, and the tactical brilliance that could benefit the entire galaxy. But we also know how to coexist, to work together. The question is, do you want to build something new? Or do you want to cling to your old ways? The choice is yours. The Concord representatives were stunned. What was humanity truly offering? Was it an alliance built on the premise of mutual respect, or was there something darker behind it? No one had ever considered humanity as equals before. They had been seen as a disruptive force, a species that couldn't sit still long enough to be counted as a serious political entity. But the time for that perception had passed. Your proposal is bold, Ambassador, said the Adian representative, his voice a mix of curiosity and apprehension. But we cannot simply overlook the danger humanity presents. Your actions, your rise to power, this has shaken us. How can we trust that you won't turn on us when the time comes? Jackson's eyes darkened for a moment, and the calm demeanor he had maintained slipped, just a little. You've made the mistake of seeing us as a species of instability. You've underestimated our ability to lead without dominating. But make no mistake, if we were to turn on you, you wouldn't even see it coming. Humanity knows when to fight, but we also know when to build. We know when to use our strength, and we know when to wield it for the greater good. A quiet, tense moment passed. Every delegate in the room understood that this was no longer just about a proposal, it was about the future of the galaxy. The realization began to settle in. Humanity, with all its imperfections, awkwardness, and loud presence, had demonstrated its potential to lead, not through brute force, but through intelligence, foresight, and cooperation. Finally, High Marshal Gillick, the one who had first questioned humanity's place, looked up. We will consider your proposal, Ambassador Jackson. But know this, if you are to be our ally, you must prove that you understand the balance of this galaxy. We will not tolerate any who disrupt that balance. Jackson's smile returned, but this time, there was a different kind of satisfaction in it. I've always known, Gillick. The balance is everything. And humanity has learned to balance power with wisdom. The galaxy will see that soon enough. We are here to be more than just another species. We are here to shape the future. And that future can be one where all species thrive together, or one where we are forced to survive alone. The choice is yours. The weight of Jackson's words hung heavily in the air. The final revelation had been made. humanity was not a disruptive child in the galaxy. They were the new architects of the future, and their role, once uncertain, was now undeniable. The galaxy had been forced to reckon with the fact that humanity was no longer a negligible force. They were a strategic ally, one that could shape the destiny of the galaxy. And that, the Concord realized, was the most terrifying revelation of all. Extra story. The Galactic Council had just started to settle into a delicate new order, with humanity emerging as the unexpected strategic partner for the galaxy's future. Ambassador Jackson had deftly navigated the complex political landscape, with his proposal for cooperation gaining traction. Humanity, once thought of as a clumsy interloper, was now seen as a critical ally in the galaxy's grander game. But as the Concord began to prepare for a future built on human cooperation, a new crisis emerged, one that no one had anticipated. It began as a whisper, a rumor circulating through the shadowed corners of Concord politics, just as things were looking hopeful. Ambassador Jackson, ever the diplomat, was walking through the corridors of the human delegation office when a sudden commotion caught his attention. His aide, Riley, rushed towards him, her face pale and filled with concern. "Sir, you need to see this, immediately." Riley's voice was tight with panic. Jackson's heart quickened. Something was wrong. He followed Riley to a secure room in the back of their offices, where a live broadcast flickered on a large screen. The image on the screen was stark. High Marshal Gillick, of the Valter Dominion, was speaking before a hidden camera. The camera angle was low, showing the Marshal in a private chamber, an expression of grave concern on his face. His voice, though low, carried a tone of quiet urgency. "This is a message for the Council, and for all leaders of the Concord. Humanity's true intentions have been revealed, and they are not what they appear to be." Jackson's stomach dropped. The room suddenly felt colder, heavier. Riley, standing at his side, gasped, but Jackson held up his hand, silencing her. He focused on the screen, watching Gillick's every word, every movement. "While humanity presents itself as an ally, a force for cooperation," Gillick continued, "they have been plotting in the shadows. There are factions within their government, factions led by Ambassador Jackson, who believe in domination, not diplomacy. These factions have been secretly arming human fleets and making plans to destabilize the Concord for their own gain." The shock wave of the words hit like a physical blow. Jackson's heart pounded in his chest. This was impossible. The Valter Dominion, the most powerful military faction in the galaxy, had accused him of plotting against the very system he had worked so hard to protect. His mind raced as he processed the implications. "Are you telling me this was a setup?" Riley whispered, her voice trembling. Jackson didn't answer. He wasn't sure if he was in shock or disbelief. The screen continued with Gillick's allegations. "We have intercepted communications," Gillick's voice was resolute, "in which Jackson and his associates discussed using the Concord's own systems and weaknesses to their advantage. They've infiltrated key positions, and their ultimate goal is clear: humanity intends to take the Concord by force, and they will do so under the guise of diplomatic cooperation." A cold chill swept through Jackson's spine. This was no accident. The Valter Dominion knew too much, and the fact that they had somehow infiltrated human communication meant that there were moles within their own ranks. Betrayal was now on the table, and humanity's carefully constructed alliance was collapsing. "This is absurd!" Jackson exclaimed, slamming his fist onto the table. The realization of what had happened, the breach of trust, the betrayal, hit him hard. Who could have done this? Who could have turned the entire galaxy against everything he and humanity had worked for? Riley looked at him with wide eyes, filled with doubt. Jackson, is it true? Were you really planning to dominate the Concord? Jackson was silent. The weight of the question pressed on him, but he couldn't answer. Everything had been perfectly orchestrated. But someone had turned everything upside down. Someone had twisted the narrative to make him appear as the enemy. Just then, the screen flickered, and the broadcast changed. Another figure appeared, Ambassador Ziril, the Kian High Counselor who had always been a strong ally of humanity. But his face, usually so serene, now wore an expression of anger and disappointment. I have seen the evidence, Ziril's voice came through the screen, his tone grave. I regret to inform the galaxy that Ambassador Jackson has been exposed. He and his associates have been leading us into a trap. They've manipulated our trust for years, and the truth is now undeniable. Humanity cannot be trusted. The words hit like a hammer. Ziril, one of humanity's few true allies, had turned on them. Jackson felt like the ground beneath him had just given way. He wasn't prepared for this. He couldn't understand how everything had spiraled so quickly out of control. How did they get to him? Jackson muttered under his breath, the weight of the situation beginning to crush him. His mind raced, trying to piece together the puzzle. Someone in the human ranks had been leaking information to the Valter Dominion. Someone had sabotaged everything they had worked for, and Jackson could see no way out. The Kian delegate, Ziril, continued. We are initiating a full investigation. The Concord will not stand idly by while we've been manipulated. The galaxy has been deceived. Humanity's treachery will be revealed, and we will take action. This is a setup. It has to be. Jackson snapped, his voice hoarse. He turned to Riley, his face showing a mixture of anger and confusion. We have been betrayed, Riley. Someone wants us to fall. And they're using everything we've built against us. Riley's face was pale, but she stood firm. What do we do now, sir? We fight back. We prove to the galaxy that we've never been anything but honest. This, Jackson paused, looking at the screen where Ziril's image remained frozen in cold accusation. This is just the beginning. Jackson knew that the galactic balance was about to change, but he would not let this betrayal define him or humanity's future. Someone had set this trap, and it was his job to unravel it, no matter the cost. He would expose the true enemy, and they would learn that humanity had never been the deceptive predator they thought.